I mean, in the manufacturing world, there are three kind of big things that are still playing. Supply chain is still there. That's not really a pandemic thing anymore. It's kind of adjusting itself. And a
Yeah.
lot of that, there's the supply chain, inflation. Inflation is a big factor in manufacturing right now, that the cost of goods everywhere, not only for us eating out in grocery stores, but for the manufacturing in parts and components is really expensive. And we're all starting to feel the cost of that. And the other thing is labor. There's a 2 million person shortage in manufacturing to do the job. As much as that manufacturers are trying to automate, there's still more jobs than we can fill.
Welcome to What If, So What, the podcast where we explore what's possible with digital and discover how to make it real in your business. I'm your host, Jim Hertzfeld, and we get shit done by asking digital leaders the right questions. What if, so what, and most importantly, now what? Hey, I'm really excited to have one of my colleagues on the show today. All-around good guy, Kevin Espinosa. Kevin, welcome to the podcast. Great to see you today.
Thanks, Jim. It's a privilege to be on your podcast.
Hey, Kevin, we've known each other for quite a while. In fact, I had a couple of meetings with you when you were on the client side. You don't remember me, so I feel bad about that to this day.
Wow. I didn't want to say that to you. I don't remember that.
Yeah.
But
Who's this guy? But anyway, we have an interesting shared history that goes even beyond our working relationship. We kind of came up in the ranks, both as electrical engineers working in automation. And I always thought it was interesting when I learned that about you. But yeah, tell us a little bit about what you're doing here. But I really want to know kind of what brought you here.
yeah, Jim, to answer that question, I'm really going to start from the beginning and try to say it fast enough that it doesn't take up the whole time. But like you did mention, I am an electrical engineer. Started my career at Caterpillar, and I was testing gears and components at the tech center. And I thought that was going to be the rest of my life, right? To have a pocket protector and, be that engineer for the rest of my life. But I think the cool thing about large companies like that is there's so many opportunities. Next thing I know, I'm actually setting up Ellen Bradley's to do the test.
Yeah.
And next thing I'm writing Oracle databases to collect the data. Next thing you know, I get a call, say, hey, do you want to work on some of these dealer applications? I'm doing dealer applications. Then I'm doing dealer operations. I'm doing service operations reviews. So I'm flying all over the North America to understand how dealers do service operations. And I always had my eye on cat.com, Jim. It's like, I want to own cat.com and I did. So that was kind of my entry into digital marketing. And then my scope kind of expanded from there, from CAD.com, social media, and then owning the whole digital marketing infrastructure. So I love that at where I was at Caterpillar. But then, as I got to 55 years old or so, I'm like, I want to try something new. I want to be on the other side. I want to take all my learnings and take it to other companies, other manufacturing companies, other B2B companies. And that's when I made the jump to Perficient. So at Perficient, I work for you, a digital strategist. And a digital strategist in your group, we all have our own superpower. And my superpower is manufacturing and B2B. I really understand that world from my past experience. And that's what I apply to our clients now. I love it.
That's awesome. I love that. Obviously, I love that story. I kind of had a very similar path. I remember engineering school, I'm going to invent something someday. I'm going to change the world. And, you're building things, whether it's a business process or a point of view or a design. I think there's just something in the engineering mindset. It's the builder's DNA, right? You take a vision for something and then you have to make it happen. So I love that about the culture we have here. But your focus is on manufacturing. I know we talk about this a lot. Manufacturers do a lot of things, right? I know not only do they build stuff, they have factories, they manufacture things. So they have to get really good at taking raw materials in and on one side of the building and putting products out on the other, but they also have to design those products. They have to understand the customers in the first place to figure out what they want. Some organizations, even manufacturers, and for a while, some of the larger manufacturers, they really made their money on financing, right? So, and some manufacturers today are really kind of like marketing and brand companies. And you look at what Nike's doing, they're kind of a brand company. And then yet even further, some manufacturers have become service companies, so their core business is providing services or insights or value-added consulting on top of that. So that's a lot, right? And I think a lot of traditional businesses have to do a lot of things. They have to be good at a lot of different things. Digital, by the way, is one of them, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think is today top of mind for manufacturers? Like what are most manufacturers worried about from
Yeah.
your perspective?
I mean, I've listened to a lot of your podcasts, Jim, and I think a lot of your guests are spot on. I think one of the things that they hit on right away is the customer. I think that customer first, no matter what business you're in, is top of mind for every company, manufacturing, financial, retail, et cetera. It's all kind of the same game, but how do you do it? Right. So,
Mhm.
and, some of them like B2C companies did it way before manufacturing companies. And, the question that you ask has so much disparity in manufacturing. One thing that I've learned being on this side of the consulting side is like manufacturing companies are all the way from A to Z on their maturity. I'm like, oh my God, this company really needs help with their customer experience or the digital marketing capabilities. I was not aware there was such a gap like that. So, I think to answer your question, it's all about the customer. And I think the magic is how do you do that? There's so many ways that you approach that. I can start all the way, like you said, on the manufacturing floor, and you can differentiate yourself with the product. You can differentiate yourself with the experience. You can differentiate yourself with services. And so I think manufacturing companies and all companies right now have to decide, who am I? Am I a brand company? Am
Mhm.
I a product company? What is going to be my niche that's going to differentiate myself from the competition?
And so, we're in the business of answering all those questions with some sort of digital solution, right?
Yeah.
First of all, I think you're going to agree with that, right? But the solution itself, like it's not just throwing technology at it, right? So, what are some of the things you have to think about besides a mobile app or a website or a connected product
Yeah.
to do that?
Yeah. I think the most important thing is, what is your strategy? Is it going to be aftermarket services? So
Mm,
if it's like aftermarket services, how are you going to get that done? You're going to sell more parts, you're going to sell more service, but really is what is the outcome of, and I'm going to carry through that example, aftermarket services. Is it selling more parts? Is it selling more service? Are you going to do that online? Are you going to do that more face to face? So having really that concise strategy that you're trying to pull through in the company. And I think, what it's really important is having that strategy, but carrying that through everybody. My previous work that I did, the corporate strategy was carried to everybody. And if your
mm,
goals didn't align with that strategy, then you probably shouldn't be doing that activity, whatever it happened to be.
yeah. Yeah.
So, understanding what that strategy is in the company and pulling that through. And then, like you mentioned, it's not technology, but then at that point, you can start thinking about what solutions, what technology do I apply in order to differentiate yourselves. And there's a lot of things that you can do at that point, Joe.
Yeah. I think a lot of companies struggle with that strategy, right? I mean, sometimes they want all the information. So I can't do anything until I know everything. And so they get paralyzed, they get stuck, right? But other times they just can't get consensus on the strategy or they don't know how to get started. Are those universal problems, do you think? I mean, that was a problem in your history, but you see it with
Definitely.
other clients as well.
Oh, yeah. And I see it now with clients. And I think that goes all back to leadership. At the point where there's a strategy, there needs to be a critical few in the executive office that's kind of saying what our strategy is from an enterprise perspective. And then it kind of trickles through the rest of the company. And that's where you get great leaders like yourselves that apply that strategy to your group, and the other parts of the executive office carry it through their group. And we're all kind of rowing and marching together to accomplish that. So it is, I see kind of a big problem, I would say, in corporate America where you don't get that leadership and that's saying, this is our strategy and this is what we're going to work to. Super important to have.
You think, and I'll challenge you on that a little bit, just in the devil's advocate here, right? Because sometimes we just don't know. Like there's uncertainty, right? There seems to be shorter planning horizons. Like, well, since we can't predict the future, we'll just create this agility right, in our business, and digital can make your business very flexible, right? We can have microservices architecture will allow us to, change our mind whenever we want to. I feel like a lot of organizations go down that route, like, hey, I just got to be ready for anything. I mean, there's some value to that, right? But at some point you have to just go or you're going to get passed.
I agree. I think the agility, the flexibility really comes in the solutioning side, right? So strategy at kind of the top of the pyramid, Jim Hertzfeld type goals in the middle of
Wait a minute, that needs clarification. What's a Jim Hertzfeld?
Oh, you have goals, and then I would have goals.
Martini on Friday night, is that the goal? Right.
No, you have goals that align to the strategy. I'd have goals that align to your strategy within our group, but then you would trust me to execute that goal, right?
Yeah.
And it could be done in numerous different ways, right? Maybe it's new platforms, maybe it's artificial intelligence that does it, maybe it's some other tool set. But at that point, that's where the flexibility, the velocity, kind of comes in the business world, I would say. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I say this a lot too. I know if anyone's a fan of American football and the NFL, the New England Patriots have, like, I don't know if it's their tagline or their slogan, which is "Do your job." And I always like that. I'm maybe not the biggest Patriots fan, but I like that as that idea because everyone has to consider their individual contribution, right? And then do that job. So if my job is to snap the ball, be the best at that, right? That's my goal. My job is to throw the ball, to catch the ball, to block, to run the ball. That really stuck with me. And by the way, I hate overusing the sports analogies, but they're just too relevant. I think that's what you're getting at. Like, if everyone has their part, understands their contribution to the team, plays their part, and does their job, then, that's the way of just making forward progress.
I love that, Jim. I mean, I think it took me a while, when you're young and you think you know everything, you think you can kind of lead it all by yourself. As you go in your career, you quickly learn that it takes a village. And when I led a division at Caterpillar, my team was so important. And I never said, I was the manager, digital marketing capabilities. I always said I'm on the team, right? Because I was just another team member that made things happen. And so that is so important to a business.
I like that a lot. I know that in manufacturing as well, it's in my sort of perception or history, may have been one of the earlier industries to sort of embrace globalization, right? So we started building factories in Asia or Mexico or overseas. There was sort of early, what we called offshoring back then.
Yeah.
That certainly continues today. And there's a lot that's been written about that. But did you guys run into that in your history, in your manufacturing history? Does that, your job kind of mentality, how did that translate globally? And I think that's the norm today. But do you think manufacturing sort of led the way in terms of globalization?
I do, right? I mean, for all the right reasons. The company that I came from definitely had to have globalization. One is to meet customer expectations, right? We had customers all over the world, and we had to have globalization in order to meet their needs. So we had to understand the customer. We had to work in their ways. We had to understand their culture. But from a business perspective, we actually had to have plants all over the world to meet the supply, right? Didn't make sense to make wheel loaders or some of the product in the United States and ship that stuff all over the world. So you eventually have plants that made sense to meet the supply. And so I think that's how a lot of it really happens. Now, Jim, I will say that, onshoring is a movement. And I wouldn't say it, maybe not as much in some of the big plant things, they're not moving where they're making wheel loaders, they're not making big things like that. But the supply chain, when it comes to parts and components and things like that, there is a big onshoring movement that's coming. And as you know, I think you hate this word a bit. The pandemic did kind of have its movement in how we do things. And watching your last podcast, commerce, like it really accelerated commerce. And I would say the pandemic had a big impact on manufacturing and direct to consumer. All of a sudden, I think that a lot of these companies kind of figured out like, man, we need to really learn who our customers are. We need to get closer to them. And we should probably be selling a little bit more of our product direct to consumer because it was really difficult to do that with all the, handcuffs we had during the pandemic. So, there were some things that really changed the way we do business. And that was one of them.
Yeah, no question. I'll clarify that. I'd like to think that the pandemic was like 100-year flood, right? It's a once in a lifetime seismic change in the way we do things. I think there'll be more seismic level changes. I just thought for a while there, we got to stop talking about it,
Yeah,
like,
no, I agree.
but was there something else to talk about? I think we're still feeling the effects of the downstream effects in industry, but some of that is a word we hear about a lot, which is resilience. I think that's driving some of the, is that right? That's kind of driving some of the onshoring is if you're offshoring, then you're suddenly dependent on the supply chain networks, right? And so by onshoring, it's a little bit of a resilience play to make sure that you're not,
Yeah,
like
I mean,
95% of your product is not coming from Taiwan, right? For
yeah.
example, right?
I mean, in the manufacturing world, there are three kind of big things that are still playing. Supply chain is still there. And that's not really a pandemic thing anymore. It's kind of adjusting itself. And a
Yeah.
lot of that, there's the supply chain, inflation. Inflation is a big factor in manufacturing right now, that the cost of goods everywhere, not only for us eating out in grocery stores, but for the manufacturing in parts and components is really expensive. And we're all starting to feel the cost of that. And the other thing is labor. Like there's a 2 million, just in the US, a 2 million person shortage in manufacturing to do the job. As much as that manufacturers are trying to automate, there's still more jobs than we can fill in manufacturing. So that is kind of a big pressure. Those three things are big pressures in manufacturing right now.
So what are you seeing in terms of out there in terms of, again, really specific, maybe emerging, I think I know how you're going to answer this, but in terms of emerging technologies or new adoption of digital technology, where are kind of the leading companies in your mind hitting those challenges head on? Like, and how are they doing it? What are they
Yeah.
doing out there to get ahead of those issues, those headwinds?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, I'm probably not going to answer this like you would expect it right off the bat, but I will get
Okay.
there. I think the biggest thing that is in the world is the first version of it was called Internet of Things, right? And now you and I call it connected.
Yeah.
And so connected products. And so I think just from a consumer perspective, a lot of us know what connected products are: your thermostat, your doorbell, your security system, your TVs, like everything's connected. I think that is a huge enabler in how some of these companies are meeting head on with, the challenges that they have. Why? Because those connected products create just tons of data. And I think at first, a lot of companies didn't know how to really handle that data. But now with things like artificial intelligence, like another tool set that you can put on top of all of that data to understand it. Because in the past, I think they just had so much data, they didn't know how to absorb it. And the other thing is they didn't know how to monetize it. There's a lot of things that you can do with the connected product. You can control the product, you can optimize the product, and then you can make the product autonomous. All of a sudden, a lot of these products don't even need touched anymore because we have so much remote control through that connected product. It's like it can just sit by itself and do its thing. When's the last time you actually physically touched your thermostat? You don't, right? Like you may be sitting in your chair, you're a little hot, you're a little cold, and you make the adjustment there. Again, you've heard this story a million times. My thermostat in our place in Florida, the renters jacking around with it. They lower it down to 67. And I'm like, no, you don't. 70 degrees. It's in our book, So there's all this control. So that's from a consumer perspective. But then you have the manufacturer side, and they have so much optimization that they can do on the plant floor because the connected product. And so now it means something entirely different. Their manufacturing processes, their control, their robots, they're connected. And, again, they're taking all this data. They can optimize all those robotics and machines on the plant floor and do a much better job. And there's other things that are happening from that perspective. They can predictive maintenance on those machines. They have less downtime on the assembly line, which is super important. Safety. And that just kind of goes on and on. So I think that, to me, connected is one of the biggest movements there is. And there are all kinds of adjacent things to that: artificial intelligence, 5G, et cetera, that support that. So that's huge.
Yeah. I think in most podcasts, Kevin, the answer would be automatically AI, right? So I'm glad you didn't open there, Because I agree with you, but you're kind of saying what we've been saying about, our AI strategies and recommendations are quickly go decompose into a data strategy, right? So we know that to have you have the data that in content, structured, non-structured, for the AI, you got to give it something to work with. So yeah, I think this is one of the most exciting parts of manufacturing. I'll throw us all the way back to our origins, because one of my really early Allen Bradley projects when I was at Whirlpool, was this is so crazy. No one will get this. Like, you'll get it. But like, I was measuring the chain stretch. Okay. So in a lot of factories, things are moved by chains and you have to manage that and they stretch out and you have to change the link and so on. That was one of my little assignments. How do you retrieve that data, collect it, and utilize it? So it was pretty rudimentary, right? You had to get really creative. So this is a pretty exciting time where the sensors and then what you can do with it is pretty cool. And I think we heard recently, we were talking to a client, Kevin, about, there'll be more connected products than people. And I'm pretty sure we passed that, right, a long time ago, but that's a pretty exciting move. So, and I think not even just manufacturers, right? Because this connected concept has implications in healthcare and even in insurance. And when you stop to think about it, a lot of applications across industries. So
yeah, Jim, my toothbrush, my Oral-B is connected. So just want to let you know that. Yeah.
Right. You're very connected. So Kevin, it's just kind of a final question for folks, and someone would like to ask, maybe two-parter, but what would you do different looking back on? And I want to ask you this because you have such a history. You've seen and done so many different things. Like, looking back on it, what would you do differently?
Oh man, I don't know if I've ever been asked that question, Jim. I think
join our team sooner. Is that
no. I think looking back at things, I would do a much better job working through the enterprise. So I owned all digital marketing capabilities. And I think sometimes I worked in my own little space, but I controlled so much and I could have done a much better job from a change management perspective. I could have done a much better job from teaching perspective. What is this tool? How do we use it? How do we maximize it? I think the days of like enterprises bringing in tools like AI and using it for this tiny little BU or this tiny use cases are gone. You name the tool. I just have to pick AI. I think the first thing that a wise manager would be is, how am I going to use it? But how am I going to scale this across the enterprise and carry it through all other types of businesses? So me, like, since I had such a big job, I think I would have done a much better job educating the enterprise on everything that I did. And I think we would have got a lot more value out of that tool set.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting concept around. That kind of boils down to me like there's knowledge management and then back to strategy, because if you're all kind of marching up to the bigger strategy and kind of understand where you're going, then you have a better sense of, not just how you're contributing, but how everyone's contributing.
Right.
So especially for manufacturers out there, if you're in a manufacturing organization today, and again, you're trying to, maybe you've got a lot of lessons learned, what advice would you give a listener who maybe is about to head out on the shop floor or about to head out to a dealer or a field sales office? What would you share with them?
Well, I think back to my point about, there's tons of maturity levels right now in manufacturing. So whether it be shop floor, whether it be in their digital marketing capabilities, et cetera, is, kind of understand your pain points, right? What are my pain points that I'm having right now that are keeping me from getting my job done, right? And so from there, I think that once you kind of brainstorm and look at those pain points, you can identify, what are those goals that I want to have that will take this company to the next level. And so having those goals, those like really tight, smart goals, focus on them, and then create the solutions. Don't think about technology first. Thinking about those solutions, what is the best tool to do that? And then again, I'll kind of summarize what I just said. Bring in the enterprise to help you with that solution, right? It's never too early to kind of bring in the CDO, the CTO, the CIO to help you out with that solution. So that is kind of my advice, is attack what you need to attack to make the enterprise better. That's what you need to look at.
You're kind of alluding to something we both love, which is OKRs, objectives and key results, which today I'm going to rename objectives and Kevin's results. So All right, Kevin, this is great. Thanks for sharing so much. Thanks for being part of this team. And hey, we got a meeting later on, so be ready for it.
Yep. Pleasure. Thanks, Jim.
All right. See you guys.
You've been listening to What If, So What, a digital strategy podcast from Perficient with Jim Hertzfeld. We want to thank our Perficient colleagues J.D. Norman and Rick Bauer for our music. Subscribe to the podcast and don't miss a single episode. You can find this season along with show notes at perficient.com. Thanks for listening.